Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is John Bradley Richards. Today we'll be discussing religion among Hispanic and Latino communities within the U.S. So let's get started with an overview. So throughout the presentation today, we're going to start with discussing the history. So kind of explaining why certain religions were most prominent within this region, the South America to Central America, just because of the history of the area. Next, we'll talk about the importance of religion. So we'll dive into that, and then after that, we'll talk about the most predominant religion among this culture in this area, and then we'll talk about the difference between a practicing Catholic versus a culturally Catholic person, and then we'll wrap it all up in the end here with we'll discuss the trends. What religions are increasing in number, what religions are decreasing in number within the Hispanic and Latino communities, and then finish it all up with a conclusion. When discussing the history of the region, it's important to think back to the origins of this area. So, of course, there was indigenous people living in the southern U.S. or throughout the U.S., Central America, and South America. But when we're thinking about like the settlers that came over, with regard to like the Central and South American regions in the southern U.S., that was primarily Spanish colonies. So when the Spanish came over and started colonizing South America, Central America, all those different regions, they brought over Catholicism with them. And when they brought over Catholicism, it spread very fast among the area. So they created missions, which are like churches where they could come and worship, and they were just trying to outreach to these indigenous people groups. So if you look over here on the map on the right hand side, you can see this brown color designates Spanish territory. So the Spanish occupied a majority of this southern U.S. Down through Florida, they occupied Cuba, Puerto Rico, and then down through Central America, and then into South America. So they controlled a huge portion of South and Central America as well as the southern portion of the United States. So they had a huge influence on this region, which led to a predominantly Catholic religion. Was Catholicism was the primary religion in this area, just because that's what the people were exposed to. It was interesting when I was doing research, I came across it was saying that the first Catholic diocese was established in 1511 in San Juan, Puerto Rico, far before Jamestown was even founded. Jamestown wasn't founded until 1607. So Catholicism was in the New World, or the New World, far before Protestantism was, and so it really had a strong hold in the Central to South America region. So Catholicism really started out when those Spanish settlers came over and started colonizing and settling the whole New World region in the Central to South America. So as we just discussed, religion is a very central part of Hispanic and Latino culture. Ever since the Spanish brought over Catholicism back in the early 1500s, the religious tradition has continued on from generation to generation and even to modern day. The Hispanic Latino community is known for being very religious. So you can see this here in this modern study that was done by Pew Research. And if you look over here, you can see we have Hispanic versus non-Hispanic people, and there's different like points that they talk about they've polled. And so Hispanic people generally attend church at least weekly, so they're more likely to attend church. They feel that religion is more important. They believe that Jesus will return within their lifetime, and they believe that the Bible is the literal word of God. So you can see just between the difference here between Hispanic and non-Hispanic, clearly the Hispanic community is a lot more religious. So religion is a very central, important part of Hispanic culture. The research has shown that Hispanics are generally more religious and more engaged in religious activities than non-Hispanic people. So now that we've established that religion is a real central part of Hispanic and Latino culture, let's look at the most predominant religion. So you join me over at this chart. Again, this research was done by the Pew Research Center, and this is with regards to Latinos in the U.S. And so it breaks it up by percentage for the most predominant religions among the Latino community. So along the vertical axis, we have different demographics. So we have all Latinos here at the top, and as you work your way down, it breaks it down by age, language, where you're born, and then your political orientation. And across the top, we have the different religions. So you have non-evangelical Protestants, non-evangelicals, Catholics, other faiths, religiously unaffiliated, and then people just didn't answer the poll. So we'll be focused here on the all Latino category for the purposes of our discussion. What really stood out to me was 64% of all Latinos in the U.S. are Christian, whether it be Protestant or Catholic. Now, what was even more eye-opening was that 43% are still Catholic. So, like we talked about earlier, Catholicism was brought over in the 1500s with the Spanish, and the religion has carried on to this day and is still the most predominant religion at 43% among the Latino community in the U.S. So that was really eye-opening to me. But it's also important to note that you have 15% evangelical Protestants and about 6% non-evangelical. So that gives our 21% net Protestant makeup of the Latino community. So, again, 64% are Christian, but the large percentage of the community is 43% Catholic. And that outweighs any other potential religious affiliation, whether that be another religion, other faiths, or they're just not affiliated at all. Catholicism is still by far the most predominant religion among the Hispanic and Latino communities. Since Catholicism is the primary branch of Christianity that Hispanics and Latinos often participate in, let's look at some closer statistics about that. So, among Hispanics, we established that religion and Catholicism is a real central part of their culture. Now, that being said, there's people who are practicing Catholics and there's people who are culturally Catholic. And so practicing Catholics are going to be people who attend Mass regularly. They engage in the sacraments. They're very active in their church. The culturally Catholic people are people who might attend Mass occasionally. They're not really active in the faith, but they still are connected to Catholicism in some way. And a lot of times the reason they are is just because of family reasons. It's a very cultural thing as well as a religious thing. And a lot of these people want to stay involved with Catholicism because it's part of their family heritage. So they feel connected to it that way. Now, we're talking about practicing Catholics versus culturally Catholic. The Mass attendance figures here, again, given by Pew Research for U.S. Catholics, they have it broken down by different races. So if we look at Hispanic Catholics here, we can see that about 26% regularly attend Mass. So about 26% of the Hispanic, Latino, Catholic community attend Mass regularly. And then about 53% don't really attend that often, maybe a couple times a year, Easter, Christmas, those kind of things. And then you have this 12% in here that, they go once or twice a month. They're not like super engaged, but they're not, like once or twice a year. They're a little more engaged than that. So you can see there's a wide range of participation among the Catholic community and even among different races. But since we're talking about the Hispanic and Latino culture and community, there is a distinction between Catholics who participate a lot, who are really engaged in Catholicism, and then others who just attend more based off a cultural aspect. So let's take a look at some trends among the Latinos in the U.S. With regards to religion. So again, this research comes from Pew Research Center, and if you look at this diagram here, we have years across the bottom. So it starts in 2010, goes all the way up to 2022, and across the vertical axis here, we have the different groups that we kind of just analyzed a second ago. And so again, this is focusing on U.S. Latinos. So starting out here in 2010, 67% of Latinos identified as Catholic, whether that be culturally Catholic or practicing Catholic. That's kind of open for interpretation, but 67% identify as Catholic. Fast forward about a decade to 2022, only 43% identify as Catholic. That's a 24% decrease in the number of Latinos that identify as Catholic. If you look at Protestantism, it has remained fairly constant. So evangelical Protestants and non-evangelical Protestants, we're looking at 12 and 5 here. Fast forward about a decade, you're at 15 and 6. Not huge changes there. Now, this kind of saddens me. The large change we see here is with the religiously unaffiliated. So they're not moving to a different faith, they're just leaving religion altogether, is what these statistics are pointing to. So in 2010, about 10% of U.S. Latinos identified as religiously unaffiliated. Fast forward about a decade, 2022, 30% identify as religiously unaffiliated. So that's a growth in 20% of religiously unaffiliated Latinos in the U.S. So religious unaffiliation is really growing in the U.S. and Catholicism is starting to shrink. So I began to ask the question, why are Latinos leaving Catholicism? Well, I continued to do some more research, and what I found is, first of all, a lack of connection. A lot of people or Hispanics don't feel like there's a lot of connection outside of Mass. They go to Mass, and once Mass is over, they just kind of leave, and there's not a lot of connection. Another thing is a lack of understanding of Catholicism. I was reading an article, and a Latino woman was talking about her experience with Catholicism. She was learning more about the religion and came to love it even more. Whereas some of her friends, they kind of walked away from Catholicism just because they didn't understand it. They didn't spend the time learning about it. It was more of just a cultural family tradition than a religion that they really they owned for themselves. And so they end up walking away from the religion. So there's a lack of understanding of Catholicism and just Christianity in general. And then often I was reading other articles, and a lot of people were leaning more towards more liberal values. A lot of the younger people were leaning towards more liberal values, and the Catholic Church doesn't really align with those values. So that was also driving some of the Hispanic and Latino community to find other places of worship, whether that be religiously unaffiliated, walking away from religion, or finding more liberal churches that would embrace these different values, less traditional values. Despite some of these trends, Catholicism is still the primary religion among the Hispanic and Latino community. It's a primary part of their culture and their family tradition. But there is definitely a trend away from Catholicism and religion entirely towards a more religiously unaffiliated approach. So my challenge is that I believe Protestants and Catholics alike should come together and find ways to meet these needs of the Hispanic and Latino community, to keep the communities involved with church and keep them coming back to church. So appreciate you listening to my presentation. I hope you learned something. I certainly did throughout this research process. It's a really interesting topic. So thanks for sticking with me. Hope you enjoyed.